Hi everyone, and welcome back to Learn English with Christy. In today's video, we're going to be talking about one of the more advanced grammar topics, and that is the passive voice. So, if you're ready, let's go ahead and begin. So let's go ahead and talk about the passive voice. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the structure of the passive voice, how and when we use it, and I will also be giving some examples. So this is one of the more challenging grammar topics, but don't worry, in today's video, I will break it down for you, and at the end of the video, there will be a little section where you can test what you learned. So first, let's understand what is the passive voice by taking a look at the active voice. So I'm going to give you two sentences. One of them is active and one of them is passive. Can you tell which is which? So our first sentence is, Jacob broke the window. And our other sentence is, the window was broken by Jacob. So which sentence is active and which sentence is passive? The sentence, Jacob broke the window, is the active sentence, and the passive sentence is, the window was broken by Jacob. So let's take a look at these two voices and see the differences. So let's take a look at our active sentence, Jacob broke the window. Here you can see that it follows an SVO structure, which is subject, verb, object. Jacob is the subject, broke is the verb, and window is the object. You will also notice that the subject of the sentence, who is Jacob, is the one doing the action in the sentence. So that's why it's called the active voice. The active voice is what we're mainly used to, and we use the active voice to be more direct about something, and we can also use the active voice if we want to tell a story. Now let's take a look at our passive voice example. So, the window was broken by Jacob. Now, we will use the structure subject plus verb plus past participle. So here, our window is now our subject, which was different from the active sentence. So window is our subject, our be verb is was, and our past participle is broken. Notice that I didn't say by Jacob. Now we can say by Jacob, but a lot of times in the passive voice sentences, it's not actually necessary to use by. So with the passive voice, we can use any tense with this. In our example here, the window was broken by Jacob, we're using the simple past. But how do we know that it's the simple past? We can see by looking at the be verb. So the be verb here is was, but really we can use any tense here. So we'll take a look at some other examples to see how we can use any tense. The class is taught by Megan. So in this sentence, it's a simple present. And how do we know? Because of is. Another example, the class was taught by Megan. This is simple past because of was. The class will be taught by Megan. Now it's in the future because of will be. The class has been taught by Megan. Now it's in the present perfect. The class is going to be taught by Megan. Now again, it's in the future. The class is being taught by Megan. Now it's in the present continuous. The class was being taught by Megan. Past continuous. The class can be taught by Megan. Now we're using a modal. So you get the point. We can use any tense in a passive voice. And how is that determined? By the be verb in that structure. So now that you know how to form the passive voice, let's go ahead and talk about when we would use the passive voice. There are 4 situations that I'll talk about today. In the first situation, we would use the passive voice when we don't know who did the action. We would also use it when it is obvious who did the action. Third, we would use the passive voice when the subject isn't important. And our fourth situation is when we don't want to say who did the action, like we don't want to blame somebody for a certain action. So let's start with the situation of not knowing who did the action. So we'll use that example we used earlier, the window was broken. Here we don't know who broke the window, so it would be a situation where we could use the passive voice. Later, maybe we find out who broke the window, so maybe then we could say the window was broken by Jacob. But by, like I said, is actually optional in a passive voice sentence. But if we don't know who broke the window, then just saying the window was broken is showing that we are not sure who actually did it. Another situation where we would use the passive voice is if the doer of the action is obvious. So for example, if we have a sentence like, the surgery will be finished quickly. In this sentence, it is obvious that a surgeon or a doctor will be the one to do the surgery. So it's not necessary to actually say that. And that's when we would use the passive. Now, if another person is going to do your surgery, then I would probably go find another hospital. But generally, it is obvious that a surgeon or a doctor will be the one to finish the surgery. Another situation where we would use the passive voice is when the subject is not actually important. So, for example, if we want to talk about, let's say, my shoes, we can say something like, my shoes were made in the USA. Here we're focusing more on where they were made, which is in the USA. We're not actually caring about who made the shoes. So if it were an active sentence, it would say, shoemakers made my shoes in the USA. But we don't really care about the shoemakers. So this is when we would use the passive voice. And the sentence would be, my shoes were made in the USA. Now, if you actually take a look at other labels of items that you have, you're going to see the passive voice, made in. That's passive voice, because it doesn't actually matter who made it. They're more focusing on where it was made. So our fourth situation where we would use the passive voice is when we don't want to say who did the action, or we don't want to blame someone for something. So this is usually used often in a workplace. Maybe you want to communicate with your coworkers more in an indirect way. So if we have a work project that we have to do, and maybe somebody was making some mistakes, instead of saying to that person, hey, you're making a lot of mistakes, you might instead use the passive voice. So you might say something like, many mistakes were made on the project. Here you know who did it, but you don't want to say that because most likely in a work setting, you're not going to be direct. You might not have that relationship with that person, or maybe you do, but in general, we would use the passive voice in these situations. Okay, so now that we have talked about the structure and also when we would use the passive voice, let's go ahead and test what you learned. So I'm going to give you some words and also a verb tense to produce your own passive voice sentences. So let's go ahead and do number 1 together. Book. Your verb is write. In 2010, and I want you to write it in the simple past. So here it should read, the book was written in 2010. Here you don't need to say by because the focus of this sentence is not who wrote it, but rather when it was written. So it's not necessary to say by the author. If you want to say who wrote it, then you might actually just use the active voice sentence. Number 2, food, cook, perfectly, and I want you to write this in the simple present. Go ahead and pause this video if you want to go ahead and write, and then I'm going to give you the answer. So the answer for this one is the food is cooked perfectly. Number 3, money. Your verb is steal, from the bank. And I want you to write this in the simple past. The answer for this one is the money was stolen from the bank. And number 4, class. Our verb is teach, on Tuesdays. And I want you to write this in the future. So the answer for this one is, The class will be taught on Tuesdays. So, how did you do with the quiz? Go ahead and let me know in the comments below. If you liked this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. That's all I have for you today. Have a good day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.